Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to find out their love was just a mask for greed? Tonight's story will shake you, because it's about a man who lost his wife, his trust, and almost his future, all for a fortune that never even existed. This is She Betrayed Me for $500M, but the fortune she chased never existed. Get ready for betrayal, lies, and the shocking twist that will leave you breathless. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Cheating Stories 7, your home for the most intense cheating and revenge stories. Now, let's begin. The pallbearers had barely cleared the church steps when the sky let go and Atlanta's damp heat slipped back into ordinary life. I drove home alone, hands locked at 10 and 2, repeating my father's storm rules the way some men recite prayers. Breathe, look far, keep steady. Inside, the house held the smell of cedar polish and lilies from well-intentioned strangers. I wanted silence. Instead, I found my wife in the living room, ankles crossed, posture composed, a folder opened on the glass coffee table with the precision of a crime scene. "Sign," Janelle said, "no condolence, no softened edge for grief." The colors in the room felt too bright, as if morning had overstated itself and left me with glare. Her eyes carried a gleam I knew well, just not from funerals, not sympathy, anticipation. I looked down. Divorce. The word thinned the air. For weeks we had spoken of hospice and schedules and pills that needed counting, and yet the paperwork was dated days before the end. She had prepared this while my father's breath shortened. My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with the late arrival of recognition. My father had warned me in sentences that never dictated, only clarified. He had told me who to be. Today I finally saw who she was. "You can stop pretending," she said. "I stayed because it made sense. Your father's accounts unlock any day now. 500 million. Lucas and I are done hiding. I don't need you anymore." I watched storm light glue itself to the window glass. "Lucas," I said, because saying his name made the confession hold shape. She smiled, but not with the face I had married. This smile was rehearsed, transactional, the kind you wear to close a deal. I replayed years in fast cuts, dinners, private jokes, quiet mornings, and wondered how much had been a performance staged on my own furniture. "You'll survive," she added, laying a pen on the line with my name under it. "You're sturdy. That's what made you a great bridge to the life I deserve." A bridge, something you walk over because it won't break. The image should have scorched me. Maybe shock dulled it. Maybe grief had already burned through what illusion could have hurt. I could still hear my father inhabiting silence the way only steady men do. Keep steady. I turned pages, prenup, inventory, the practical bones for dismantling a. Beneath the clauses, a subtext, "Hurry so I can run." My palm rested on the glass to stop its trembling. She misread it as hesitation and let out a soft laugh that didn't bother with kindness. "No need to be noble," she said. "Everyone understands survival. Lucas understands. He's younger, he's hungry. By the time you figure out how to move on, we'll be boarding for Capri." I signed the first page, clear, legible. Her smile faltered. I signed the second, then the third. She blinked as if she had trained for a fight and I had refused my lines. "That's it?" she asked. "You wanted my signature," I said. "You have it." I did not tell her what my father had told me 2 weeks before the end, machines murmuring, his hands still warm. He spoke of a community center he had tried to save, a loan that soured, a number so large it sounded like folklore. Collateral, not treasure. I stored it as truth, not as a weapon. "Don't be bitter," she said, gathering the papers like winnings. "Be thankful. I stayed long enough for you to say goodbye. There are sentences that try to buckle the world. That one tried. My mouth opened and closed around air. I found the chair back with my fingers, stood only when my legs agreed, and tasted iron where anger wanted a speech. "You should pack tonight," she continued. "I'll send movers for what's yours when the transfer clears. Lucas knows a firm. They handle everything. No need to drag this out." I capped the pen and slid it toward her. "Benjamin never dragged anything out," I said. "He finished what he started." She rolled her eyes, already stepping into the version of herself she believed a number could purchase. On the porch, the storm had sheared away, leaving the light rinsed and clean. I could still feel my father's last squeeze, a passing of a torch that weighed less than money and more than pride. At the door, I paused. The house was suddenly deeply quiet. Lily's cedar the echo of a life. She was watching me, waiting for the plea that would flatter her. The scene she could frame as my weakness. I offered neither. "Goodbye, Janelle," I said. "Goodbye, Ethan," she answered, bored more than cruel. "You'll thank me one day." Maybe I would, but not for the divorce or the affair or the tidy cruelty. If gratitude ever found me, it would be for this clarity. Surface charm charges interest. It collects when you least expect it. The gate clicked shut behind me. I kept steady. Somewhere inside the quiet part of me, a fact stood up and stretched. The thing she was chasing did not exist. What I had lost might finally make room for what remains. I walked to the truck with my father's 3 lines folded small in my wallet. Facts before feelings. Do not perform pain for people who enjoy it. Speak once and only when you are ready to be done. The evening air held no thunder, only a clean absence. I understood it, not surrender, not defeat. Positioning. The paper she carried would file. The truth I carried would hold. And soon enough, her story would meet the wall she couldn't see. Goodbye to the house, to the lilies, to the ghost of an album we performed for other people's phones. Goodbye to the bridge she mistook me for. She could run toward Capri. I would drive toward steadiness. And somewhere between those 2 maps, weather would decide which one was honest. I already knew. Before the folder on the table, before her voice turned cold and asked for my signature, there had been the first laugh across a hotel lobby bar. Janelle wore a navy dress that caught the light like rippling water. I had stepped out of a client dinner to answer one of my father's texts and found her studying a wine list as though it held a secret map. She asked what I would recommend. I answered badly, and she laughed anyway. Later I would replay that laugh, hunting for a warning I missed. There was none. Some stories begin with omens. Ours began with charm executed to perfection. Conversation was her stage, and she never forgot her lines. She remembered names, asked the kind of questions that seemed designed just for you, listened without ever glancing at her phone. In rooms that made most people stretch themselves tall, she made air feel softer. Friends said I looked younger with her lighter. Benjamin, my father, watched from a distance and smiled with the quiet pride of a man who believes his son may have finally outrun solitude. When he met her himself, he was gracious, curious, cautious. After dinner, he said, "She's bright. Brightness can warm a room, but it can also blind." I laughed at the time because love is good at turning warnings into poetry. We built life quickly, mistaking speed for destiny. Weekends at farmers' markets, tours of open houses, Monday mornings filled with screenshots of coastal towns we couldn't yet afford. She liked speaking in futures. One day we'll have a place on the water, one day a kitchen in white oak and brass, one day I mistook appetite for optimism. When I earned a promotion, she toasted with champagne and slid a notebook toward me, lists of upgrades, car, sofa, vacations, wardrobe. It was playful, almost comic, but the columns had numbers and the numbers were exact. To outsiders, we looked charmed. We hosted dinners where she seated guests with precision so conversation never stalled. She collected their stories, polished them, and reflected them back until each guest felt important. Photos from those nights still live on other people's phones. The string lights, her hand on my sleeve, my smile without the lines I wear now. Even I believed the album more than the days between. But between the snapshots, quieter truths tapped against the glass. The way her eyes sharpened at the mention of equity or an early exit. The way a brand name could tilt her mood. The way she steered talk away from saving for ordinary stability. Cracks appeared, but they whispered, never shouted. A handbag that cost more than a mortgage payment. A joke at my expense that drew more laughter than she meant. New friends with fast cars and faster stories. She called them aspirational. I told myself she was collecting motivation, not measuring me and finding me light. I worked longer hours, wore the strain like proof of love. She rewarded those hours with photographs of restaurant tables I wasn't at and texts that said next time with sparkles added. I accepted them as affection instead of absence. Benjamin never intruded. He asked questions that made me hear my own answers. Do you two rest? Do you have a plan that isn't just a purchase? He never said be careful. He only said keep what matters visible. I nodded, told him we were fine. At dinner, she praised him for his stories about building things that lasted, and I wanted to believe admiration was inheritance. On the porch later, he would look down the street and murmur, "Stability isn't a prison, son, it's a platform." I thought he was blessing us. He was warning me. She started keeping separate calendars, pillates, networking breakfasts, volunteer shifts. Innocent enough until the breakfasts stretched, the lunches ran late, the evenings filled with events I never joined. When I offered, she said my presence would make it feel like work. I told myself marriage needed space, but space is not the same as distance until it is. On Sundays, when I mentioned budgets, she suggested spontaneity. We compromised with both. I built spreadsheets, she booked flights. The arithmetic balanced as long as I ignored the cost behind it. Visitors saw order in our home. Prints aligned on walls, bowls for keys, vases that never ran out of lilies. They thought tenderness lived there, and sometimes it did. Mornings she curled into me in gray light. Afternoons she texted jokes so specific I laughed out loud at my desk. But tenderness, when leveraged, can be a tool. I didn't know that yet. I believed attention was care. I believed care guaranteed loyalty. Belief is patient with lessons. When talk turned to money, her voice always brightened. Not greed, hunger. As if the right number could silence something buzzing since childhood. She told me about restaurants her family passed but never entered, dresses tried on but never purchased. I wanted to open every door for her. I didn't see that some doors, once opened, shrink every other room. The year before the funeral, her restlessness sharpened. She compared our vacations to other people's feeds, our car to a friend's lease, our home to a listing one zip code closer to the lake. When I said we were fine, she called me comfortable and made the words sound like coward. The first time I laughed. The fifth time I stayed late at work. She texted me a rooftop photo captioned one day. I sent back a heart. She didn't reply. Looking back, I can map the line we walked without seeing. It runs from that first laugh to the night she came home with perfume I didn't recognize and a smile that didn't ask me to notice. It runs through small lies dressed as white. It runs through moments where I decided love meant absorbing impact without keeping score. It ends at a glass table under storm light, papers waiting for my name. The crack had always been there. That night only made it visible. And yet, even now in memory, I must admit, there was love or the shape of it. There was effort, or at least a performance so well rehearsed it fooled its actors. We were not villains in every scene. We were two people trying to turn promise into proof. If you want a single mistake that explains everything, I don't have one. I have 100 small ones, and one large belief that let them multiply, that a perfect surface can hold the weight of imperfect hearts. The surface held until it didn't. And when it finally broke, it didn't shatter with noise. It bent, bowed, and then, under the weight of death and money and hunger, it snapped clean. Which is how you come home from a funeral and find a life arranged into signatures, and the woman you loved rehearsing a farewell that sounds like opportunity. The crack had always been there. Only now, it split wide enough for the truth to enter. Trouble didn't march through the door with slammed cabinets or shouts. It arrived quietly, like a draft you don't notice until the room chills. After the glossy start of our marriage, Janelle's warmth began to cool in increments so slight I mistook them for ordinary seasons. At first, it was the late nights. She'd claim she was with friends or catching up on work. I believed her because trust is supposed to be the bedrock. But patterns build whether you want to see them or not. Excuses stretched longer, rehearsed smoother. When she slid into bed, perfume lingered, notes that didn't belong to her bottles. I told myself it was imagination. Love is a skilled liar when asked. Her laughter changed, too. Once she teased me lightly about forgetting laundry. Now her remarks cut. "Ethan, you're comfortable with mediocrity," she said one evening, pushing casserole around her plate. "You'll never be more than a steady paycheck." I tried to chuckle, but the words stayed lodged. Comparisons followed. Other couples with bigger houses, better cars, photos in Europe while we were still at home. Every example drew a line she wanted me to chase. I answered with effort. Longer hours, larger accounts, promotions that stole my evenings. I brought flowers, booked weekend getaways, replaced appliances she dismissed as outdated. Gratitude never stuck. She'd thank me with a distracted smile, then scroll her phone, chasing brighter lives. The more I gave, the less it meant. Sometimes I caught her staring out the window, her gaze far past the street as if she were already gone. When I asked, she sighed, called me paranoid. "Don't be so needy," she said. "Not everything is about you." I told myself marriage bends, it doesn't break. I told myself storms pass, but each reassurance cost me something I didn't realize I was paying. Benjamin noticed before I admitted it. One night during dinner, he leaned close and murmured, "She looks away from the table more than she looks at you." I bristled, defended her, but his words stung because they were true. In public, her charm still glittered. Neighbors praised her warmth, friends laughed at her stories. Behind our door, the smile thinned. Conversations turned transactional. Affection rationed itself like a scarce currency. I'd catch her texting in bed, the screen tilted away. Her lips curved in a secret smile I hadn't earned in months. Still, I told myself this was a phase. Seasons turn back, don't they? I convinced myself all marriages endure distance. I convinced myself harder work would earn closeness again. I doubled down. Promotions, pay raises, devotion sharpened until my hours stretched like wire pulled too thin. And each time I reached for her, she slipped further like sand you can't clench. I began to sense the shape of something under the surface, fault lines waiting, patient. I mistook them for turbulence, but they were cracks running deep, preparing to split the ground I was standing on. The smile stayed in photos. It did not stay in the house. The first proof didn't crash in like thunder. It whispered, written in numbers. A weekday charge on our joint card for a boutique hotel I'd never heard of, late checkout. I asked Janelle casually if the card had been skimmed. She glanced at the statement, shrugged, and said a concierge must have double-billed her networking dinner. Her answer was too quick, too neat. I swallowed it anyway because swallowing was easier than tasting the bitterness of doubt. The next bill arrived like a mirror I couldn't avoid. Ride shares to neighborhoods not on her calendar. A wine bar receipt time-stamped 15 minutes after she texted early night. Pilates at 6. A florist charge with no flowers in our house. I began stacking the papers into a folder I labeled insurance, though it felt more like evidence. My hands shook when I tucked it into my desk. Once I stopped protecting my version of us, proof multiplied. A jacket draped on our armchair carrying cologne that wasn't mine. A hotel stub hidden in her wallet, but the cruelest betrayals came through a screen. One evening, her laptop chimed while she showered. A message preview floated across the spreadsheet. "Lucas Hayes, tonight was unreal." She had left the sound on, that was how sure she was I wouldn't look. I read nothing else, just fragments. The string of hearts, the Thursday plan, the photo icon I didn't dare open. After that, his name began to sneak into our conversations. Trimmed small, disguised as ordinary. Lucas says the new CRM is a mess. Lucas swears the turnpike is faster. Lucas knows a guy who can get us a table. Hayes, young, sharp, quick in meetings. I had shaken his hand once at a launch event, his smile eager, his compliment practiced. "You're lucky, she's a force." I hadn't recognized the boundary test for what it was. One night walking past the guest bathroom, I heard her voice lighter than it ever was with me. A laugh like the first months of our marriage. "He's fine, reliable, you know, bridge energy." The phrase sliced clean, she listened. "Yes, of course he pays, of course." Her soft chuckle after that confirmation still echoes. I set a glass down too hard in the kitchen. She emerged moments later with a smile she could slip on like jewelry. "Work?" she asked. I nodded, pretending my chest wasn't hollow. We both carried secrets, hers intentional, mine protective silence. I didn't confront her. Not then. Rage would have given her a stage. Instead, I watched. I checked accounts, saw the slow bleed of pretty things. A silk dress never worn for me, a tasting menu reserved for two, another corner hotel room. She financed their excitement with the steadiness I had built. My labor converted into receipts for her romance. Confirmation came when a mutual friend posted photos from a fundraiser. String lights, glitter, silent auction tables. In the background of the third image, blurred but unmistakable, Janelle's hand on a lapel that wasn't mine. The intimacy of the gesture spoke louder than a kiss. I took a screenshot, then set the phone face down as if hiding the evidence from myself could unmake it. Benjamin would have told me to breathe, to use words as tools, not weapons, but he was fading by then. I refused to bring him receipts and screenshots, refused to let my storm cloud his last season. So I made a rule: no decisions for 7 days. For 7 days, I would collect facts, not conclusions. Each day obliged, a suspicious double charge. A text she typed then deleted when she noticed my glance. Earrings gone on Friday, back by Sunday after brunch with the girls. The worst proof wasn't financial. It was overheard in the quiet of our hallway. "He's steady," she typed on her phone, unaware I stood near. "He'll never leave. That's the point." Luca's replied, "And the house?" She soon. Luca's again. "You said soon last week." Her reply: "Funerals complicate timelines." My father's failing breath pressed in around her words. Betrayal and grief sat side by side in my house, both patient, both hungry. That night she slipped into bed smelling like a bar I hadn't entered. "You're quiet," she said. I told her I was tired. "We should take a trip," she offered. "Reset." I asked where. "Capri," she said. She smiled as if the word itself was a promise. I heard the plea inside her tease: "Don't reduce me to math." But the math was already there, lines I couldn't erase. I rehearsed confrontations that ended cleanly: you, me, truth, decision. But life doesn't honor tidy scripts. If I accused her without undeniable proof, I'd become the villain in her story. So I waited. Let the evidence arrange itself. Let the collapse arrive on its own tide. There is a silence unique to betrayal, when the structure is still standing, but you already know the beams are rotting. I lived in that silence, stacking papers, stacking fragments, stacking truths. And each night I heard my father's fading voice in memory: "Keep what matters visible." What mattered now was not her affair. It was my steadiness, the ground I would choose when the floor finally gave way. My father never staged interventions. He wasn't the type to pound a table and declare truth. He planted sentences like seeds and let time, weather, and conscience do the rest. By the months when Janelle's smile had thinned into something only strangers admired, Benjamin moved slower, but his eyes stayed sharp. He asked me to drive him on errands he could have delegated. Small trips to the hardware store for a box of screws, to the nursery for a rosemary bush, to the community center with its flickering lights and peeling paint. He didn't need the items. He needed me to see. One evening, traffic low and heat clinging to the oaks, he sat on the porch, sipping water from a glass he didn't finish. Janelle passed behind the screen door, her voice pitched low, a register I never heard when she spoke to me. My father's eyes tracked her until the latch clicked. Then he said, calm as a weather report, "Your wife's loyalty isn't in her vows, son, it's in her appetite." The words landed like naming a bruise. He didn't soften them. Appetite isn't evil, but if you don't set the boundary, it will set you. I defended her because defending was habit. She works hard, she wants a good life. He nodded, not disagreeing. Wanting isn't a crime, but ask yourself what the wanting costs and who keeps paying the bill. At the community center, he tapped the backboard with his knuckles, the hollow thud echoing across the empty gym. I was still thinking about a boutique hotel charge I had tucked away in the insurance folder. "Stability isn't a prison," he said. "It's a platform. From it you can build, or you can jump and hope for a net." He looked at me long enough for the words to carve deeper. "Nets are for mistakes, Ethan, not for plans." At the clinic, waiting on test results, he closed a magazine and slid me a pen. "Write down what matters when your head gets loud. 3 lines. I humored him, thinking it an exercise in grief management. He dictated: 1, facts before feelings. 2, do not perform pain for people who enjoy it. 3, speak once and only when you are ready to be done. I folded the paper, slipped it into my wallet beside an old photo of us fishing at dawn, his cap tilted back, his grin easy. I carried both like talismans. He never asked me to bring him proof of Janelle's betrayals. He asked me to be ready. Quietly, he suggested setting alerts on our joint card for charges above a certain number. Not suspicion, he said. Stewardship. He told me to photograph important papers, email them to myself under boring subject lines, to buy a fireproof envelope, to open a post office box, to memorize a lawyer's name he handed me on a slip of paper. Throw it away if you like. I didn't. I kept it beneath the insurance folder where truth was slowly stacking. When we hosted donors from his old network, Janelle glowed, dazzling with questions about returns, but always steering the conversation toward houses on the water, vacations as trophies. Afterward, Benjamin washed the glasses himself. She knows how to hold a room, he said. So do auctioneers. My defense rose brittle. He rinsed a plate, added, ask the simpler question, Ethan. Does she love the thing or what the thing says about her? I started noticing what he noticed. The way her eyes brightened at a price tag, not a book. The way she praised me when I booked something expensive and turned quiet when I talked about time. The way Lucas's name slipped into sentences about software or traffic. I never gave him receipts or screenshots. I gave him questions. He let the silence answer. On a gray Tuesday, we drove back from the nursery with a rosemary plant he didn't need. He held it under his nose, inhaled, and said, prepare for disappointment the way you prepare for a storm. Don't panic. Put away what must stay dry. Check the windows, keep a light handy. If the storm veers, you lose nothing. If it hits, you've kept what matters visible. That was how he spoke, no ultimatums, only maps. I asked him finally if my marriage could be saved. He didn't offer comfort, he offered math. Trust is compound interest. If she keeps withdrawing and never deposits, the account closes on its own. You can't float it forever without bankrupting yourself. I carried those sentences like anchors disguised as ropes. When Janelle came home late with a smile too polished, I practiced stillness. When she compared our life to someone else's curated feed, I wrote down facts before letting feelings draft conclusions. When she asked for a midweek flight, I checked the alert, saw the boutique hotel again, and quietly logged the date. The night before the funeral, he asked me to sit by his bed. He was thinner, but his gaze still firm. I've failed at many things, he said, but not at teaching you how to stand up. Standing up isn't shouting louder, it's choosing better ground. When this is over, choose it. He squeezed my wrist the way he had when I was a boy lost in a crowd. Keep steady. He never mentioned her by name. He didn't need to. He never spoke of the 500 million either. That truth would arrive later with ledgers and collateral. What he left me with was sharper, a list of tools small enough to carry, strong enough to outlast appetite. So when Janelle slid the folder across the glass table days later, called me a bridge, and mistook my silence for surrender, I heard my father's voice beneath hers. Speak once, be done, keep what matters visible. And I realized then I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was ready. After Benjamin's decline turned sharp, Janelle carried herself like a woman rehearsing for a coronation. The house filled with lilies and whispered condolences, but she walked through it as if the air already smelled of salt water and yacht varnish. At first, her hints were playful. When things settle, Ethan, we should start looking at property on the coast, something with a dock. She stirred her coffee while her eyes flickered not with imagination but with certainty. Soon the language shifted, not should but will. She spoke of glass houses overlooking the ocean, wardrobes stocked with labels once pressed behind store windows, villas with terraces where champagne would spill into new mornings. It was no longer a dream she invited me to share. It was a blueprint she expected to be built. At night, when she thought I was asleep, her voice softened into conspiratorial whispers. It's almost ours, Lucas. 500 million, villas in Italy. A yacht in the Caribbean, no more waiting for scraps. She laughed light and cruel before adding, Ethan will fade into the background once it's settled, he always does. Lying in the dark, jaw clenched, I understood her mistake. She mistook silence for weakness, patience for stupidity, but I was neither, I was steady, and steady men don't rush toward cliffs. Lucas fed her fantasies with digital fuel. Notifications flashed on her phone, links to waterfront estates, private jet charters, sunset photos from Monaco. She devoured them, sighing as if the champagne already touched her lips. Dinners at home grew fewer. She brushed off my offers with a distracted kiss, running out the door as though the world were a waiting room for her wealth. I became the old magazine left behind, pages curled, ignored. What she didn't know, what Lucas couldn't guess, was that Benjamin had already told me the truth. Days before the end, in his study thick with cedar dust and paper ledgers, he explained what her fantasy concealed. That 500 million, he said, voice worn but steady, doesn't exist as inheritance. It's tied up. Collateral for a dream that collapsed. If I don't clear it before I go, the bank will. He chuckled then, a dry laugh at his own failed gamble. Your wife believes she's waiting on treasure. She's waiting on an empty box. Now, listening to Janelle whisper to Lucas about yachts and villas, I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity is a candle in wind. It doesn't last when betrayal is the draft. What replaced it was resolve. I began to watch her differently. Every handbag, every champagne toast, every sudden weekend conference became part of a performance for a stage that would never open. Her charm was hunger wrapped in satin. She wore her anticipation like jewelry, never suspecting the necklace was glass. And through it all, I said nothing. To expose her then would have been to spoil the lesson already waiting. Greed is its own executioner. All it requires is time. So I waited, and I listened. And I sharpened the truth like a blade I would only need to swing once. Because the fortune she betrayed me for was an illusion. And illusions, when they shatter, cut sharper than truth. Funerals are meant to slow time, to stretch grief into hours that let memory breathe. My father's did the opposite. The church filled with faces he had once steadied, contractors he had fronted when banks said no, teachers from the community center he tried to save, men who learned to shake his hand and mean it. Eulogies braided his years into something strong enough to carry him beyond the doors. I held the program like a map I couldn't fold correctly. Beside me, Janelle stood flawless still, but miles away. During the hymn, light from her phone glowed faint against her purse lining. She tilted it just enough to read, then let it go dark. When the pastor asked us to bow our heads, she leaned close and whispered, barely breath, "How long until accounts transfer?" Her words struck colder than the stone floor beneath our feet. I kept my eyes shut, counted breaths. Facts before feelings, my father had told me. I gave her none. In the fellowship hall afterward, casseroles and pies lined folding tables like offerings. People pressed my hands, telling stories of how he had saved them, a check for a roof, a remembered name, a second chance. Janelle smiled in the right places, collected condolences like a hostess working a room. Then she drifted toward the door. I followed and found her on the steps, phone pressed to her ear, her voice bright for someone who didn't deserve it. Weeks, maybe days. She said, "Yes, 500. No, I'm not guessing. Trust me, he's the only child." A pause. "Lucas, don't rush me. Probate is paperwork. It's practically ours." I stared at the bricks underfoot, at a hairline crack no one else noticed, and realized she had come to the edge of grief only to measure the depth of pockets. Back inside, she cornered my father's attorney near the coffee urn. She introduced herself as though they were peers and asked about disbursement schedules. He answered in the dry language of reality: valuations, creditor claims, collateralized assets. Her eyes glazed at creditor. She wanted to hear inheritance. She only heard obligation. In the car, rain started without conviction on the windshield. She adjusted the mirror and said, "Let's be adults about this." "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About moving on. This is a natural break. You can keep the truck. I'll take the house until the transfer clears." She said transfer the way a priest might say mercy. Then, generous, "We'll handle the accounts tonight. I have everything ready." The oaks on our street lifted wet arms toward a flat sky. She tapped her nail on the console. Capri in July, Portofino in September, villas not hotels. Lucas hates hotels. She smiled at villas the way some smile at their children's names. Back home, the house still smelled of lilies and cedar, the same mixture it would wear in memory. She set her purse on the table, vanished to change. I lingered in my father's study. The chair turned toward the window as if expecting him back from an errand. On the desk lay his heavy black pen. I touched it like a relic, then set it down gently as if it might bruise. When she returned, grief had no seat left. She wore a crisp blouse, lipstick sharpened, hair smoothed for certainty. She placed a folder on the glass table with a flourish. The rings snapped open with a sound that split the day in two before-after. "Sign," she said, sliding the first page toward me. "There's no need to be dramatic. We both knew this was coming." I studied the title, Petition for Dissolution, as though language might soften if I read slowly. She mistook silence for hesitation, offered comfort with the bored patience of a manager. "You'll land on your feet, Ethan. You always do. You're steady. That's why this worked as long as it did." She smiled, empty of warmth. "But I don't need steady anymore." Her timing wasn't careless. It was deliberate. Bury the man who had built a platform, leap while the dirt was still wet. I thought of the men in the pews, of their rough hands grateful for his steadiness. I thought of my father's 3 lines folded in my wallet, facts before feelings. Do not perform pain for people who enjoy it. Speak once and only when you are ready to be done. She kept talking, gilding betrayal with inevitability. "I was patient," she said. "I gave us time, now it's my turn." She didn't say Lucas, she didn't need to. His shadow hung in every syllable. I set the folder aside, poured a glass of water I didn't want. The house felt like it was holding its breath. She laughed softly, nudging me back into the script she had written. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You sign, I file, we both move on." Grief and betrayal rarely arrive together. But when they do, they braid into a rope you can either be dragged by or climb. I chose to climb. I chose to breathe, to look far, to keep steady. By nightfall, my name would be inked where she wanted it. But in that hour, sitting between the fresh dirt of a grave and the glass table of a marriage, I saw what her timing revealed. She didn't respect loss. She didn't understand love. She only understood numbers she thought would line up in her favor. She pushed the pen toward me. "Come on," she said. "It's just a signature." I looked at the pen my father had favored, at the line he had told me existed long before today, and I nodded once. If she thought the end was a flourish, she didn't understand that sometimes the quietest stroke ruins the forgery. The pen lay between us like a weapon neither of us wanted to name. Janelle tapped it against the glass table, her manicured nails ticking in a rhythm that sounded too much like triumph. She had timed this moment perfectly, fresh soil still clinging to my father's grave, my chest heavy with grief, and she mistook my silence for surrender. "Go on," she urged, lips curving. "It's just a signature. Make this easy on yourself." Her confidence might have unsettled another man, but Benjamin had trained me with steadiness. Facts before feelings. Speak once only when you are ready to be done. Those lines folded in my wallet burned hotter than her smugness. I picked up the pen, not with trembling, but with the kind of calm that made her pause. I signed the first page, my handwriting sharp and deliberate. Her eyes flicked to the paper, surprise cutting through her smile before it returned. "That's good," she said. "You're finally learning to let go." But letting go wasn't defeat. It was positioning. She thought she was climbing into a kingdom. I knew she was walking toward a cliff. "Don't worry," Janelle added, her tone dripping condescension. "You'll thank me one day when you realize I spared you the humiliation of being left." I looked at her fully then. The woman who once laughed at my bad jokes now spoke like an executioner delivering mercy. She thought she was breaking chains. She was fastening them to her own ankles. I signed the next page, then the next. With every stroke, her certainty faltered a little more. She had expected rage, begging, bargaining. Instead, she got silence, chosen silence, sharpened silence. When I capped the pen and slid it back across the glass, I said only one word, "Done." She blinked, unsettled. "That's it, you're not even going to fight." "You wanted my signature," I said. "You have it." Her smirk returned, thin and brittle. She leaned closer, perfume sharp, with a note I didn't recognize. "You'll regret this, Ethan. When the transfer clears and I'm gone, you'll wish you had fought harder." But I wasn't fighting her anymore. I was waiting. Waiting for the truth Benjamin had already given me, the ledger, the collateral, the empty chest she mistook for gold. She thought I had surrendered. She didn't realize silence can be strategy. She gathered the folder with exaggerated care, as if she were crowning herself queen of a life already promised to Lucas. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she walked away, her victory rehearsed, her downfall already scheduled. I sat for a long time after she left, the weight of the pen still in my hand though it was no longer there. My father's voice filled the quiet. Keep steady, speak once. Be done. That night, the house smelled of lilies and cedar, but beneath it all was something sharper. The clean air of a battle I had not fought because the war had already decided its winner. She thought she had written the ending. She hadn't even seen the twist. 3 days after I signed, the storm she thought she had outrun broke open. My office door slammed wide enough to rattle the frame. Janelle stood there in a blazer she hadn't buttoned, mascara smudged like she had cried in a car mirror. Two of my assistants looked up from their desks, startled. I raised a hand, guided her into the conference room, and shut the glass door behind us. She shoved a stack of papers across the table, bank letterhead. Her voice was a hiss. What did you do? They froze everything. I read without touching. Estate account subject to hold pending probate, collateralized assets, secured creditor review. The words were dry, precise, unbending, the kind of truth that doesn't care if you believe it. You called them, she accused. You told them to lock it. Don't lie to me. I didn't call anyone, I said. Her phone buzzed on the table. Lucas, you said wire today. Where is it? Another ping, screenshots, now. She flipped the phone face down, then back up again as if the message might change. I went to the branch, she said, breath quick. Asked for a manager. They kept repeating pledge agreement claims ahead of beneficiaries. Do you hear yourself in those words? This is you. It's the bank, I said evenly. She paced the length of the table, heels clicking like a clock speeding up. They said months, Ethan. Do you understand what that does to my? She caught herself. Recalibrated. To our plans, they said there's documentation, covenants, filings. The last word tasted bitter on her tongue. The phone buzzed again. Lucas, you promised. I turned down a project for this. If you're playing me, tell me now. She stared at the screen, typed something, deleted it, stared again. The 3 dots never returned. This is sabotage, she snapped. You think if you make me wait, I'll come crawling back. Is that it? I stayed silent. Silence is a mirror. It forces people to see themselves. She slammed another letter down, different letterhead, same verdict. Your father's attorney won't take my calls. He says he represents the estate, not me. Do you hear that? He said beneficiaries aren't clients, like I was nothing. He is reading the law, I said. Not you. Her laugh cracked. So you'll just sit there and watch me be humiliated. Tell them to release it. You're the heir. Use your influence. There is none to use. Then call in favors, or don't you have any? A memory pressed itself in, Benjamin tapping a backboard in an empty gym. Nets are for mistakes, not for plans. I folded my hands and said nothing. Lucas is waiting in the parking lot, she pressed. We're supposed to meet a broker in an hour. Do you hear the clock ticking? We're losing a villa because you won't pick up the phone. Her phone vibrated again. Lucas, broker, wants proof of funds. Last chance. Don't make me look stupid. She typed, I'm handling it. His reply came fast. Are you, though? The dots vanished. Her voice frayed. You always hated that I wanted more. You called it appetite. I called it vision. You called it appetite, I said quietly. I called it cost. She flinched, then tried to stand taller. If you had any decency, you'd fix this. You don't fix probate, I said. It runs its course. I don't care about probate, she spat. I care about access, about what's mine. I let the word mine hang heavy in the air. Possession, a simple tense that grows complicated when you try to conjugate it. She dropped into a chair, shoulders shaking. For the first time, fear showed through her anger, not grief, not rage, fear. The kind that realizes the door you walked through has no handle on this side. He said 500, she whispered, not to me. He said we'd never have to think about numbers again. Who said? I asked, though we both knew. She closed her eyes. It doesn't matter. It did, but not here, not now. Outside the glass wall, my team moved like the world hadn't shifted. Binders carried, phones ringing, lives continuing. Inside, Janelle sat small against her own grandeur. Tell me it's a mistake, she begged. Tell me there's a form, an exception, something. I shook my head. Her phone buzzed one last time. Lucas, I'm not waiting around for a fantasy. Call me when it's real. Then a second message, blunt as a slammed door. Good luck. She stared at the screen, cheeks blanching, jaw tight. The future she had narrated for months, yachts, villas, a life without limits, collapsed in silence. You'll pay for this, she whispered finally. It sounded less like a threat than a prayer. I opened the door. The hum of the hallway rushed in. "Take care of yourself," I said. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a boundary. She walked out without looking back, her shoulders squared like a soldier, leaving a parade ground turned battlefield. I remained, the letters spread before me, none of them requiring my permission. Outside, storm clouds stacked high over the city but refused to break. Inside, I waited, not for her return, not for justice, for the next fact. Acts always provide the next one. 2 nights after the office scene, Janelle arrived at the condo I had rented downtown. Her eyes were rimmed red but blazing with the defiance of someone refusing gravity. She stormed in without waiting for me to offer the door, clutching a folder of bank letters like a prosecutor at trial. "They're lying," she said before I could speak. $500 million doesn't just disappear." I gestured toward a chair. She ignored it, pacing, muttering about conspiracies, about managers too cautious, about lawyers on someone's payroll. Her words tumbled like dice, angry, random, desperate. At last, I opened the drawer of my desk and slid a single page across the table. She snatched it up. "What's this?" "Proof," I said. "Not of sabotage, of reality." Her eyes darted across the words: pledge agreement, collateralization, loan balance outstanding. She frowned, then reread, her lips moving like the language itself was mocking her. "Collateral, this doesn't make sense. He was rich. He had everything." "He had dreams," I corrected. "Dreams that cost more than cash. That $500 million was pledged against a community project that failed. The bank owns it now. What you thought was inheritance was debt." Her face drained. The certainty she wore like perfume vanished. She shook her head as if denial could rewrite ink. "No, you're lying. You've been planning this. You wanted me to look like a fool in front of Lucas." "You did that on your own," I said. Almost on cue, her phone buzzed. Lucas's name lit the screen. She answered quickly, put it on speaker as if volume would give her strength. "It's just a delay, baby. Probate takes time." His voice sliced through. "You told me 500. You promised villas, yachts. I turned down contracts waiting for this, and now you're saying it's gone." "It's not gone," she cried. "It's just tied up." Silence filled the line, then Lucas laughed, a sound stripped of warmth. "You conned me. Do you have anything?" She stammered. 75,000, that's what they said, but 75. His tone cracked like glass. "I don't do scraps, Janelle. Call me when you're real." The line went dead. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the floor. She stared at it, then at me, her mouth opening and closing like a door in a storm. For the first time since I had met her, she looked small, not dazzling, not commanding, just small. "You knew," she whispered. "You let me plan, knowing it was smoke." "Yes," I said, "because nothing I could have said would have stopped you. Greed is louder than reason." She sank into the chair, shoulders caved, the silence between us not triumph but verdict. She had gambled trust, marriage, dignity on a treasure chest that had never existed. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I folded the page back into the drawer and stood. "Now you know," I said. "The fortune you betrayed me for was never there." Her eyes filled, not with remorse but with rage at the void. Rage at the hollow space where her empire should have stood. That was the last image I carried of her as my wife. Not radiant, not victorious, not even cruel. Just broken by a truth she could not spend. The first message arrived before dawn. "Can we talk?" Then another and another. By mid-morning, my voicemail filled with apologies written like press releases, polished but hollow. By noon, the words stripped down to something raw: "I'm scared." I made coffee, answered emails, let the phone cry into silence. That evening she came to the condo unannounced. Mascara scrubbed off, hair pulled into a hasty knot I had only seen on moving days and emergencies. She lifted her hand when I opened the door, palm up as if permission could be poured into it. "Please," she said, "I need 5 minutes." We didn't go inside. I stepped into the hall and shut the door behind me. Boundaries are not insults, they are furniture. If you don't place them, someone else will. Her voice was softer than I'd heard in years. "I messed up," she began. "I was grieving wrong. I panicked. I said things I didn't mean. I thought money would fix the ache and I lost the thread." Her eyes searched my face for a cue. We can fix this, therapy, a reset. We were good once. Remember the farmers' markets, the porch, the lists we made. I remembered, but memory is not a contract. Ethan, she said, touching my sleeve, I still love you. Love is a word that fills any room you let it, but in her mouth it sounded like a sales pitch for a product already returned. You love what I made possible. I said, not me. She flinched. That's not fair. Facts before feelings, I answered quietly. You mocked my work. You spent my money on someone else. You promised him a life using my name. When the math collapsed, you came here. That isn't love. That's gravity. Her jaw tightened. So you're perfect. You never failed me. I failed in 100 small ways, I admitted. But I didn't trade our life for a rumor and a receipt. Her eyes dropped, then lifted with a tremor. Lucas is gone, she whispered. Everyone is gone. I don't have a plan. You had a plan, I said. It just depended on a number that never belonged to you. She wrapped her arms around herself, posture folded in. Don't do this. Don't be cruel. Cruelty would have been a speech designed to bruise. I had none left. I'm not here to hurt you, I said. I'm here to end what you ended months ago. The elevator chimed, doors opening and closing for no one. She rushed her words, desperate to fill the silence. We can sell the house, start small. I'll cut up the cards. I'll get a job that isn't about events. No more dinners, no more hotels. I'll prove it. Trust is compound interest, I said, repeating Benjamin. The account is closed. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. I was scared, she confessed. Your father was dying, and I thought if I could build something big enough, the grief would shrink. I chased the wrong light, but the woman in those photos, the one who laughed with you, that was me. I don't doubt she existed, I said. I doubt she's here now. The mask slipped, voice sharpened. You're punishing me because I wanted more. I'm protecting myself because you wanted without paying, I said. There's a difference. She stared at the closed door behind me as if it might open on its own. So that's it, you win. There isn't a scoreboard, I said. There's only damage and what we do to keep it from multiplying. Her breath came in a tired gasp, older than we were. What do I do? She asked, stripped of armor. You call a lawyer. You return what you can. You stop promising futures you don't own. You tell the truth when it costs you. You learn a quiet life and let it teach you. Her eyes searched for a back door into the answer she wanted. Finding none, she tried one last whisper. If I wait, will you change your mind? I touched the paper in my wallet, Benjamin's handwriting steady as ever. Speak once, be done. No, I said. Tears came, chased by anger. You're cold. Benjamin would hate this. Benjamin taught me this, I replied. He taught me to choose better ground. We stood in that neutral hallway, two people with nothing left to trade. She wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and stepped back. You'll regret this, she said. The words rang empty, a habit more than a curse. I hope not, I said. I wish you well. Her lip trembled at well, a small word and the only gift left. She turned to the elevator, pressed the button too hard, and stared at the seam of its doors until they shut. Inside the condo, quiet waited. I locked the door, not a slam, just a click. Some endings don't need thunder. They need boundaries. On the counter, Benjamin's note lay folded soft from handling. I slid it back into my wallet. The power had shifted, not because I had taken anything from her, but because I had stopped offering myself as collateral for someone else's hunger. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent but kind. Tomorrow would bring ordinary questions, and for the first time in years, I was ready to answer them. Decline didn't fall on Janelle like a single crash. It seeped in, one denial at a time. A card machine blinking declined at a boutique she once treated like her private closet. A maitre d' smiling politely as he explained the list was members only tonight. A group chat that went silent after she typed brunch Sunday and watched the bubbles never appear. Lucas cut her off with a message that could have been a receipt. We're done. Don't call. Blocked before she could even draft her counteroffer in the language of regret and future promises. Friends who orbited her during the shiny seasons realigned with him, or with silence. Invitations vanished. Sympathy required a story she no longer had, that she stood on the cusp of something enormous. The cusp turned out to be a cliff. She left the house she once called hers by right. Movers carried out sleek furniture she had financed on confidence and minimum payments. 2 pieces came back because the credit line snapped between loading dock and invoice. The rest followed her to a smaller apartment with a window facing brick and a sink that coughed before it ran. She told the leasing office she was between portfolios. The agent nodded, the way people nod when they've heard the same script too many times to ask for detail. Her wardrobe, once her armor, turned into inventory. She photographed handbags and heels on a cheap throw blanket, wrote captions that bent language to mean lightly loved instead of price to move. She met strangers in parking lots under fluorescent lights, smiling with the brittle charm of a vendor who couldn't afford to negotiate. The cash came folded, small bills, smaller dignity. She made piles, keep, sell, maybe, then moved items from keep to sell when the rent reminder hit her inbox like the toll of a clock. She clung to old habits longer than pride allowed, showed up at an art opening in a borrowed dress, found her name missing from the door list. The publicist smiled the smile reserved for the once important. Next time, RSVP earlier. Through the glass, Janelle watched women she used to outshine tilt their heads toward a joke she couldn't hear. She turned away before pity could find her. At the market, once a weekend joy, she bought produce by weight and set back the berries when the number blinked too high. She switched to second-hand shops where clerks didn't know her size. She learned which coffee places refilled hot water for free. She lifted her hand for taxis, then dropped it, calculating. She walked instead. The city shrank and grew depending on what she could afford that day. Humiliation found new routes. A young planner she once mentored emailed her, "We're going in a different direction." A charity board reminded her of the donation minimum that secured voting rights. A salon texted an automated message about loyalty points the same week she cut her own hair in a bathroom mirror. At night, she scrolled through old photos the way others touch scars. Rooftops, glittering rooms, a face open as a page. She tried to caption them and couldn't. Comments grew stale. The new ones came from accounts with names like Shopgirl77. Is this still available? The only DMs that persisted carried firm fonts and pleasant signatures, creditors, not admirers. Shame fogged her apartment, a private weather system that dimmed even cheap light bulbs. Anger, once her fuel, burned down to ash. What remained was a question she never said aloud. What if I wanted the wrong thing so loudly I couldn't hear anything else? Meanwhile, I moved forward, not with vengeance, just with steadiness. I woke early, worked hard, came home tired in the better way, the way that means you used the day instead of escaping it. I watered plants on the condo windowsill, overfed them until I learned their thirst. I ran in the mornings, cooked simple meals without staging them for approval. Bills arrived. I paid them without applause. I met with the board of the community center. The numbers were modest, unflattering. "We can make this smaller," I said. "We can make it honest." Relief flickered across their faces, relief heavier than applause. Sometimes, crossing downtown streets with a coffee in hand, I caught my reflection and startled at the absence of noise in my head. Betrayal had not made me harder. It had made me plain, and in that plainness I found something sturdy enough to hold me. Once I saw her across a crosswalk. A paper bag tore, oranges rolled into the gutter. She crouched, scooped, steadied the bag, and kept moving. She didn't see me. I let her have the mercy of not seeing. Some lessons are meant to be learned in private. By the end of that season, the ladder she had climbed for years stood bare, each rung labeled with a price she had gladly paid until the invoice came due all at once. She could call it bad luck, my cruelty, or the bank's indifference. But under every excuse lay the quiet fact. She had chased air and called it gold. Now she tasted it, the hollow fullness of greed. I didn't celebrate the echo. I watered the rosemary plant on my balcony because my father had liked its smell and set my alarm for dawn. Tomorrow's work would still be there, so would I. Rebuilding did not come with fireworks or grand gestures. It came with receipts, quiet mornings, and small steps that steadied my feet after years of walking on someone else's stage. After the dust settled, I met with my father's attorney. The numbers were blunt. No fortune, no empire, just what remained untouched by collateral. $75,000, a sum Janelle had once dismissed as scraps. To me, it wasn't scraps, it was seed. Not a throne, but a compass. I opened a separate account and labeled it Benjamin Fund. I didn't touch it for rent, repairs, or indulgence. It sat like a North Star, a reminder that integrity is wealth no one can repossess. Some men wear rings to remember their vows. I carried an account to remember my father's. Instead of chasing mansions, I bought a modest two-bedroom just outside the city. Stairs that creaked, a porch that caught the evening light, walls that didn't need approval to matter. The realtor apologized for the small kitchen. I told her it was perfect. I didn't need a showroom anymore. I needed a foundation. On weekends, I dug in the soil along the fence, planting herbs, remembering how Benjamin would rub rosemary between his fingers and breathe it in. Inside, I hung one of his old blueprints on the wall, not a tower, not a palace, but the sketch for a community park. It reminded me of what lasts, things built to be used, not admired. Work shifted, too. I stopped measuring success by contracts Janelle once bragged about. I chose clients who respected process, not just payoff. That meant fewer champagne toasts, but also fewer late nights staring at spreadsheets. It meant mornings where I brewed coffee and knew the day belonged to me. People asked if I was dating again. I said no. Healing is not a race, and companionship is not a trophy. Silence became a companion instead, no longer punishment but peace. I learned how to hear myself again without her voice turning every quiet into judgment. Sometimes in grocery aisles or on city streets, I saw faces from her old circles. People who once envied her clothes, her vacations, her charm. They didn't greet me. Some looked away, embarrassed by the sides they had chosen. I let them. I wasn't collecting apologies. At night, I sat on my porch while the city lights blinked in the distance, faint as stars. I thought about Benjamin's warning, your wife's loyalty isn't in her vows, it's in her appetite. He had been right. And now I understood appetite's cost. I also understood what patience had saved me from becoming. The new path wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant to be. It was durable, honest, mine. And every time I checked the Benjamin Fund, untouched, whole, I remembered wealth without integrity isn't wealth at all. It's a weight. And I had finally set it down. The first board meeting smelled of old coffee and dust. The mismatched chairs, some too tall, some too short, looked like a visual summary of the community center itself, oversized dreams teetering on shaky legs. The treasurer cleared her throat and read numbers that made no room for fantasy. Rent in arrears, vendors unpaid, utility notices worded like ultimatums. No one said 500 million. Everyone knew better now. I looked around the table, at faces weathered by years of disappointment, and said, I'm not here to resurrect an empire. I'm here to build something that can survive Tuesdays. Silence fell, the kind that sits heavy in rooms where hope has already made one lap too many. Then a few heads lifted. We began to take inventory. Which programs brought people through the doors, which rooms earned their keep, which lights could stay on at night, which ones could rest in the dark. The old plan had chased scale. The new plan would chase fit. We started with the gym, the only space the neighborhood fought to save even when the budget couldn't. Saturday basketball stayed, but with limits. A sign-up cap, a posted maintenance schedule, mops assigned with names written in marker. Afternoons turned into homework labs with donated Chromebooks. A retired teacher paid a stipend, volunteers who signed a code of consistency. Evenings rotated. GED prep on Mondays, resume clinics on Wednesdays, grief groups on Thursdays led by a counselor who insisted on folding chairs and plain cookies. I called past due vendors myself, not to promise miracles, but to promise sequence. Here's what we can pay now. Here's what we'll cover next quarter. Here's the email you can use when fear wakes you at 3 a.m. Some accepted. Some cut their losses. Either way, the ledger turned honest. We posted a one-page update in the lobby each month. Dollars in, dollars out, programs served. Transparency became our only luxury. Donors came dressed in conditions. One wanted naming rights large enough to drown the front door. Another wanted a gala that would cost more than the lights we were trying to keep on. I said no more often than I said yes. The yesies came from unexpected places. An HVAC company that offered free servicing if we trained 2 apprentices. A grocery chain that sponsored snacks in exchange for letting their employees tutor once a month. A church that only wanted a safe room on Fridays for single parents to breathe. We renamed the building quietly, not the Benjamin Carter Center, that sounded like marble and speeches, but the Carter Commons. A commons is not about ownership, it's about passage, use, safety. A small brass plaque by the door bore words my father would have allowed, built for use, kept by love. I didn't spend the Benjamin Fund. I wouldn't turn his lesson into collateral for anyone's appetite, even a noble one. I gave time instead. Coffee, labor, listening. I fixed door closers. I learned the names of kids whose shoelaces had memorized the gym floor better than their own streets. Some Saturdays, I swept the gym before the first game and found myself humming the hymn from his funeral, not as grief, but as rhythm. The custodian, once a skeptic, once a vendor on the overdue list, showed me how to make the floor shine. Shiny doesn't mean slick, he said. Grip keeps them upright. I wrote it down because it was about floors, and it wasn't. We measured impact like grown-ups. Attendance, retention, test pass rates, job placements. The numbers were modest but real. A teenager who showed up 5 weeks in a row was a win. A parent who smiled once in grief group was too. The board stopped asking when we would scale and started asking what we would keep or cut to make it through February. February is where dreams die. Ours lived stubbornly on fluorescent light and cheap coffee. On the anniversary of his death, we held no ceremony. We planted rosemary along the fence and let the kids crush sprigs between their fingers, breathing in the oil and memory. I didn't say Benjamin's name. It was there anyway. People from the old days trickled back, not with checks. They were wary of checks, but with hours. A plumber teaching 2 teens how to solder without burning drywall. A CPA explaining budgets to seniors told all their lives math wasn't theirs. The Commons became less a building than a habit. Show up, do your part, leave it better. Late one night after the last light sighed into darkness, I sat on the front steps. The air smelled of rain and rubber and rosemary. I thought about the version of me who measured love by purchases and success by applause. I thought about Janelle's lists, Capri, Portofino, and realized I had learned a new geography. There are maps with water you can't drink, and there are maps with wells. I had chosen the latter. When the board offered to name a room after my father, I asked for the smallest one, the study where kids logged onto GED portals, where men in work boots printed resumes. We hung a photo of him there, not in a suit, but in rolled sleeves, laughing at something unseen. Under it, a line, stability isn't a prison, it's a platform. Legacy didn't arrive with trumpets. It arrived in small habits, footsteps in the gym at 3:58, a janitor letting his granddaughter hold the keys, a parent emailing to say we passed the math section. Luxury had always asked to be seen. Legacy asked me to see. On my way home, I checked the Benjamin Fund the way some people check the weather. It sat still, untouched, a compass needle refusing to waver. Wealth without integrity is a storm cloud that never rains. Integrity without spectacle waters things. At the modest house with creaky stairs, the porch received me like an old friend. Rosemary grew by the fence. I rubbed a sprig between my fingers. The scent rose clean, as if a door swung open in some old room, letting in air I had almost forgotten how to breathe. It was late, the kind of evening when the city softens. Streetlights flickering awake, wind gentling, the sky a muted bruise. I was locking up the Carter Commons after a board meeting when I caught her reflection first, faint in the glass door. Janelle stood across the street, arms folded, shoulders hunched against a chill that wasn't entirely weather. "Ethan," she called softly, as if saying my name gently might undo years of fracture. I waited as she crossed. Heels were scuffed, polished, chipped, luxury drained from her frame until only the shell of someone remained. Up close, she looked smaller than memory allowed. "I need a minute," she said. We stepped into the small lobby, fluorescent light buzzing overhead. She glanced around at the bulletin boards layered with flyers, the faint smell of wax and sweat, the mismatched chairs. You really kept this alive, she murmured. Benjamin would be proud. He would, I said. My voice was steady. She nodded too quickly, as if afraid silence would congeal between us. Then the words spilled. I made mistakes. Lucas, the money, the lies, it was all noise. I see that now. I see what I threw away. Her eyes watered, less steel now, more desperation. Please, Ethan, give me another chance. I still love you. Once, that sentence would have landed like a rope thrown across a gulf. Now it sounded like an echo of a song she no longer remembered how to sing. You don't love me, I said quietly. You love the idea of being safe again, stability, shelter from the storm you created. Her lips trembled. That's not true. It is, I replied. If the 500 million had been real, you wouldn't be here. You'd be on a yacht in Capri posting sunsets, convincing yourself betrayal was just another business decision. But the chest was empty, and only then did you remember my name. She flinched, eyes closing as if to shut out the truth. For a moment I saw her younger, laughing at farmers' markets, scribbling lists of trips we never took. That woman had existed, but she had died the day Janelle chose greed over vows. I have nothing left, she whispered. No friends, no love, not even dignity. All I have is this chance to ask. Don't shut the door. I held her gaze, not cruel, not pitying, just steady. Betrayal kills trust, and trust can't be bought back. Not with apologies, not with time, not with desperation. Her shoulders shook. So that's it. After everything, you just closed the door. Yes, I said, reaching for the handle. But gently, because cruelty isn't what I carry anymore. Closure is. She stared at me hollow-eyed, the truth settling in where denial used to live. For once she didn't argue, she simply nodded, broken but understanding. I opened the door. Cool night air swept in. Take care of yourself, Janelle, I said. Her breath hitched as if she'd expected rage, maybe even triumph, but not kindness. She stepped into the dark, her heels fading into the rhythm of a city that had stopped applauding her. I closed the door. Not a slam, just the quiet click of finality. I leaned against the glass, my reflection layered over hers retreating. For the first time, the mirror showed me not what I had lost, but what I had become. Closure, not cruelty. Boundaries held shut, not from anger, but from peace. And with that, her story ended where it always should have, outside the door while I walked forward inside. Seasons turned, and with them, so did I. Life without Janelle was not a vacuum, it was a clearing. The noise was gone, the suspicion, the mental calculations, the rehearsed alibis. In its place came mornings of simple quiet, eggs sizzling in a pan, coffee steaming as sunlight crept across the counter. The absence of her chaos felt less like loss and more like air returning to lungs. At work, I stopped grinding myself into the shape of ambition that once fit her definition of love. I no longer chased contracts to impress or stayed late to prove worth. I chose projects that mattered, steady, solid, useful. My team noticed. My boss noticed. Recognition came not as a trophy to parade, but as a tool I could use. Proof that calm persistence built more than frantic climbing ever had. Evenings found me back at the Carter Commons. I wasn't saving the world. I was sweeping gym floors, fixing leaky faucets, listening to teenagers complain about exams and heartbreaks. Small things, durable things, legacy instead of spectacle. The kind of life Benjamin had tried to map for me with his steady sentences. I realized then integrity doesn't sparkle, but it outlives glitter every single time. Solitude no longer scared me. I filled it with books, with runs at dawn, with conversations over simple dinners, sometimes with colleagues, sometimes with neighbors, sometimes alone content. Silence had once felt like punishment. Now it sat beside me like an old friend, steady and kind. Slowly, carefully, I let connection crack the door open. A woman from the board brought muffins one Saturday, stayed to talk about her late husband. A neighbor waved each morning until one day he invited me to join his walking group. Nothing rushed, nothing desperate. Relationships didn't need to be ladders or ledgers. They could simply be ground you walked together. One night I stood on my porch while the skyline stretched beyond the trees. The city lights blinked like stars you could almost touch if you climbed high enough. But I didn't need to climb anymore. I wasn't chasing Capri or Portofino. I wasn't waiting for inheritance. I wasn't watching for betrayal. I was living here now on my own terms. For years, Janelle had called me steady like it was an insult. Now I wore the word like armor. Steady wasn't boring. Steady was freedom. Steady was the refusal to become collateral in someone else's gamble. The night breeze carried the scent of rosemary from the fence line. I rubbed a sprig between my fingers, breathed in its clean sharpness, and smiled. For the first time in too long, I wasn't waiting for her, for fortune, or for pain. I was standing steady enough. And that was the ending I had earned. And that was the story of she betrayed me for $500M, but the fortune she chased never existed. In the end, betrayal always comes with a price. Janelle thought she was chasing luxury, but all she found was emptiness. Ethan, on the other hand, discovered that integrity and peace of mind are worth more than any fortune. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's place? Would you have forgiven or walked away for good? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Cheating Stories 7. We bring you more dramatic tales of betrayal, revenge, and the lessons they leave behind. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay steady and never let betrayal define you.